At 71, I still believed routine was a form of protection. Every morning followed the same rhythm: coffee before sunrise, feed the animals, walk the fence line, stand for a moment on the porch, and listen to the land breathe. I had lived on this property outside Red Willow Valley, Idaho, for over 4 decades, long enough to know when something felt off. And lately, it did. Nothing dramatic. No broken locks. No strange cars parked on the road. Just small things that didn't belong. A gate latched differently than I remembered. Mud on the porch steps when it hadn't rained. My desk drawer left slightly open when I was certain I had closed it. People dismiss those details. They call it age, forgetfulness, loneliness. I called it pattern recognition. I was a civil engineer before retirement. You don't spend 40 years solving structural failures without learning how small stresses lead to collapse. Systems don't fail loudly at first. They whisper. My daughter Elena had started visiting more often. Too often. She said she was worried about me living alone since her father passed. Said she wanted to help, fix the Wi-Fi, organize paperwork, check on my truck. Elena was 52, capable, sharp, and suddenly very interested in the details of my life she'd ignored for years. I didn't say no. I let her help. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was ignoring how she asked questions. Not how are you feeling? Not do you need anything? Instead, it was always logistical. Where are you going today? What time do you usually leave? How long does it take you to get into town? Do you drive the highway or the back road? She said it was concern. I told myself the same. But concern doesn't feel like surveillance. One afternoon, I stood in my garage staring at my truck, a faded blue 1998 Silverado, dented door, cracked dashboard, but dependable. I'd driven it for nearly 20 years. I knew every sound it made. That day, it felt unfamiliar, not broken, watched. I shook off the thought and went back inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Elena's last visit, how she'd lingered in the garage longer than necessary, how she'd insisted I leave the room while she checked something under the hood, how irritated she seemed when I returned too quickly. At 2:13 a.m., I got up and walked to my desk. I opened a folder of old documents, deeds, insurance papers, bank statements. Everything was there, but the order was wrong, subtly wrong, like someone had copied them, then tried to put them back the way they found them. That was when the fear settled in. Not panic, not yet, just the cold understanding that someone wasn't waiting for me to fail. They were preparing. The next morning, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I rolled the truck halfway out of the garage, not to drive it, to look underneath. And that decision changed everything. I had no idea what I was about to find under that truck, or that it would force me to question whether my own daughter was trying to protect me or erase me. I didn't rush. That was the first thing I reminded myself as I eased the truck farther into the daylight. Panic makes mistakes, and whatever had been bothering me for weeks deserved patience, not fear. I grabbed the flashlight from the workbench, same one I'd owned since my engineering days, heavy, scratched, reliable. I lay flat on the cold concrete and slid myself under the truck, the familiar smell of oil and dust wrapping around me like an old memory. At first, everything looked exactly as it should. Axle, exhaust, frame, normal. Then my hand brushed against something smooth. I froze. I reached again, slower this time, tracing the edge of the object with my fingertips. It didn't belong. It wasn't part of the truck. Too clean, too deliberate. I angled the flashlight upward. The beam caught a small black box magnetically attached to the frame rail. Rectangular, industrial, about the size of a deck of cards. A tiny red light blinked steadily, patient and alive. My throat tightened. I didn't touch it right away. I just stared. I had seen devices like this before, though never on my own vehicle. Job sites, fleet monitoring systems, equipment meant to be installed by professionals, not hobbyists. This wasn't cheap, and it wasn't accidental. I checked the temperature with the back of my hand. Warm, not from the weather. The morning air was barely 50 degrees. This warmth came from activity, from transmission, from use. Someone had installed it recently, very recently. I slid out from under the truck and sat on the garage floor, listening to my heartbeat. 71 years old, living quietly on a ranch, and someone thought I was important enough to track. The question wasn't what the device was, it was who put it there. I didn't rip it off, that would have been foolish. Instead, I took photos, close-ups of the serial number, wider shots showing its exact placement. I documented everything the way I had been trained to document failures for court cases and insurance claims. Evidence first, emotion later. Only then did I remove it, using a paper towel to avoid leaving fingerprints. The magnet released with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. I sealed the device inside a plastic bag and carried it into the house. At the kitchen table, I stared at it, like it might start talking. I ran through the list of people who'd had access to my garage. The feed delivery driver. Unlikely, he barely spoke. My neighbor Hannah, who borrowed tools occasionally. She still struggled with her smartphone. And Elena. My daughter had been alone in the garage for nearly 20 minutes the week before. She said she was checking tire pressure. Tire pressure doesn't take 20 minutes. I felt a slow, sinking realization settle in, but suspicion isn't proof, and proof matters. So I made a decision that went against every instinct screaming at me to confront her. I put the tracker in my desk drawer. I left the truck in the garage, and I didn't drive anywhere. If someone was watching my movements, I was about to disappear. Within 24 hours, the silence would break, and the person who broke it would reveal far more than they intended. The first day passed without incident. I stayed close to the house, giving the illusion of normalcy while changing nothing. Fed the animals, cleaned the shed, repaired a loose board on the fence. The truck stayed parked in the garage, exactly where it had been when the tracker was removed. My phone stayed quiet. That in itself was unusual. Elena usually called once every few weeks, sometimes less. But after her recent visits, I had expected curiosity, a check-in, something. Nothing came. By the second day, the quiet felt intentional. I cooked a pot of stew and ate alone at the kitchen table, the desk drawer only a few feet away. The device inside it felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried intention along with circuitry. Mid-afternoon, my phone finally rang. Elena. Her voice was light, almost too casual. "Hey, Mom. Just calling to see how you're doing." "I'm fine," I said. A pause. Short, but telling. "Everything running okay over there?" she asked. Not how I was feeling. Not if I needed anything. Running. "Yes," I said. "Why?" "Oh, no reason. Just checking." Another pause. "You been driving much?" There it was. "I've stayed home," I said. "Truck's backed up. Thought I'd leave it parked." Her breath caught. She tried to cover it with a laugh. "What's wrong with it?" "Transmission slipping. I don't want to risk it." "How bad?" Her questions came faster now. "Are you taking it to a shop? When? Which one?" I leaned back in my chair and stared at the wall. This wasn't concern. This was loss of control. "It can wait," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." The silence on the other end stretched longer this time. "Well," she said finally, voice tighter, "just be careful. At your age, car trouble can turn serious." "I'm 71, I replied, not helpless. After we hung up, I sat very still. Elena had just confirmed what I suspected. Someone had been watching my movements. And whoever it was didn't like losing visibility. That night, I replayed the past 6 months in my mind. Elena insisting on setting up my internet herself, fixing my laptop when it ran slow, asking for my passwords, just in case, sitting at my desk longer than necessary. None of it had felt threatening at the time. It felt helpful. I walked into my office and opened the laptop. My hands hesitated over the keyboard. If someone had installed software, checking it might alert them. So instead, I shut it down. I wasn't ready to reveal what I knew. Not yet. I needed to understand the full scope. The next morning, Elena called again, earlier this time. "Mom," she said, breathless, "you sure the truck's the only issue? Nothing else wrong with it?" Her wording made my stomach drop. "Why would there be?" I asked. "No reason," she said too quickly. "Just asking." When the call ended, I knew 2 things for certain. First, this wasn't about safety. Second, the tracker wasn't the only way she was watching me. And whatever she was planning depended on knowing exactly where I was at all times. I wasn't just being monitored, I was being managed. That night, I would discover the second set of eyes watching me and realize the danger went far beyond my truck. I waited until after midnight. The house was quiet in the way only rural places ever get. No traffic, no neighbors. Just the low creak of the old beams settling and the steady hum of the refrigerator. If someone was watching my screen, they'd expect me to be asleep. That was the advantage of routine. People rely on it. I turned on the desk lamp and opened my laptop. The startup felt louder than it should have. I held my breath until the screen lit up. Everything looked normal at first. Desktop background, icons where they belonged. I opened the task manager. Rows of processes scrolled past, most familiar. Security software, system updates, background services I recognized from years of use. Then I saw it. A process running quietly in the background, using minimal resources, designed not to be noticed. Remote Access Bridge.exe. I stared at the name for a long moment. I hadn't installed anything like that. I didn't click it, didn't highlight it, didn't touch the mouse. Instead, I reached for my phone and searched the name there, away from the laptop. The results made my hands tremble. Remote access software, commercial grade, allows full control of a computer from anywhere. Screen viewing, file access, keystroke monitoring, installed 6 months ago. The same week Elena fixed my Wi-Fi. I scrolled through the access logs. Dates and timestamps jumped out at me. Files opened when I wasn't home. Bank statements, legal documents, property records. Someone had been reading my life like a manual. I closed the laptop slowly, resisting every instinct to delete the program. If I removed it, she'd know immediately. Whatever control she had would vanish, and people don't react well when they lose control. Better to let her think she still had it. At 1 a.m, I pulled on my jacket and walked across the gravel road to my neighbor Ruth's house. Her porch light was still on. She answered the door in slippers and a robe, concern written all over her face. "I need to use your computer," I said. "Mine's acting strange." She didn't ask questions. She just stepped aside. On her old desktop, I searched everything I was afraid to search at home. Federal statutes, computer fraud laws, unauthorized surveillance. Then I searched the model number from the tracker photos. That was when the fear turned cold. The device wasn't just for location tracking. It was marketed as a vehicle control module, fleet grade, law enforcement grade, capable of remote engine shutdown, fuel cut, brake interference when integrated correctly. I watched a test video. A sedan driving at highway speed. Then, without warning, the engine cut, the wheels locked. The car spun violently and slammed into the barrier. The driver was a professional, on a closed track. A real road would mean death. I leaned back from the screen, nauseous. Someone hadn't just been watching me. They had installed a weapon. I thanked Ruth and walked home under the stars, my breath fogging the cold air. Every step felt heavier than the last. By the time I reached my porch, the truth was unavoidable. My daughter hadn't been protecting me. She had been preparing to control me or remove me. By morning, I would learn how close she already was to taking everything and how little time I had left. By sunrise, sleep felt impossible. I made coffee and didn't drink it, just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam as if it might explain how my life had quietly slipped out of my hands. The tracker, the spyware, none of it existed in isolation. These were tools, not motives. People don't build systems like this unless they're working towards something. I needed facts, not theories. At 8:30, I drove into town using my neighbor Ruth's car. I avoided the highway and parked 2 blocks away from the office I hadn't visited in years. Samuel Grant, the attorney who had handled my husband's estate, still practiced above an old hardware store downtown. He looked surprised when I walked in. Concern followed quickly. "What's wrong?" he asked, already reaching for his glasses. I handed him a flash drive, photos of the device, screenshots of the software, dates, logs. I watched his face change as he clicked through the files. "This is serious," he said finally. "Potentially criminal." "There's more," I said. "I think someone tried to file legal authority in my name." His fingers stopped moving. "You think," he said carefully, "or you know. I need you to check." Grant turned to his computer and pulled state records. The room was silent except for the keyboard. Then he exhaled slowly. 2 weeks ago, he said, a durable power of attorney was submitted under your name. My chest tightened. I didn't sign anything. I know, he said. The notary flagged it. The signature was almost perfect, but the ID didn't match. I tried calling you. I had been camping. No service. Grant clicked again. There's another issue. He turned the screen toward me. 3 days earlier, an application had been filed using my property as collateral. $410,000 loan, private lender, high interest, aggressive terms. I paid off this land years ago, I said. Yes, he replied, which is why this stood out. The lender isn't legitimate. They operate under multiple names. People don't miss payments with them. They disappear. I didn't ask who filed it. I already knew. By noon, I sat across from Mara Collins, the owner of the local auto shop. I showed her the tracker photos. She didn't even need to look long. This isn't just GPS, she said. It's integrated. Whoever installed it knows exactly what they're doing. What happens if it activates while driving? She didn't soften her answer. At highway speed, you wouldn't survive. The room felt too small. I drove home slowly, every mile heavier than the last. My daughter owed money, a lot of it, and she had used my life as leverage. That night, I wrote a timeline on paper. 6 months ago, software installed. 2 weeks ago, power of attorney attempt. 3 days ago, loan application. 1 week ago, vehicle device. It wasn't panic, it was preparation. And I was running out of time. That night, I made a call to someone who knew how desperate people behave and what they do when the clock runs out. I hadn't spoken to Claire Donovan in over a decade. She was a retired financial crimes investigator, the kind who saw through lies because she'd spent a lifetime watching people drown in them. We weren't close friends, but we shared history, trust, earned the hard way. I dialed her number just after midnight. She answered on the third ring. This better be important. It is, I said, and it's about my daughter. The silence that followed told me she was awake now. I gave her everything, the tracker, the spyware, the forged documents, the loan, the timeline. I didn't interrupt when she asked questions. I let her assemble the picture herself. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. She's in trouble, Claire said. Real trouble. How much time do I have? If the lender is who I think it is, she replied. Not much. They don't collect politely. What do they usually do? They remove obstacles. I didn't need clarification. Which makes you the obstacle, she continued. If something happens to you, control transfers. Property becomes liquid. Debts get paid. I closed my eyes. Why not just ask me for help? I said. Because shame makes people stupid, Claire said, and fear makes them dangerous. She told me the lender's name, Iron Peak Holdings. A shell operation tied to half a dozen fraud cases. People who defaulted didn't go to court. They vanished. Or their assets did. They'll show up soon, Claire said. To evaluate, to pressure. Maybe to scare you. And my daughter. She's either planning to sign everything over or remove the one thing standing in the way. I looked at the desk drawer where the tracker sat, silent now. What do I do? Protect yourself, she said. Document everything. And don't confront her alone. I thanked her and hung up. By morning, I had a plan. Not to run, to finish what she had started. I drove into the city and paid cash for equipment I never thought I'd need. Small cameras, audio recorders, a stripped-down laptop. Nothing connected to my home network. Nothing traceable. Back home, I spent hours placing them carefully. Living room, kitchen, office, porch, every angle covered, every word recordable. If my daughter was going to lie to me, I wanted it preserved. At 4 p.m, I made another call, this one to a federal field office. I didn't dramatize. I didn't beg. I stated facts. My daughter has installed a remote vehicle control device on my truck. She forged legal documents. She tied my property to a criminal lender. I believe my life is in danger. There was a pause. Then the agent said, "We need to talk." "We can," I replied. "Tomorrow, at my home." That evening, I practiced what I would say. Not accusations, questions, calm, precise. The truth reveals itself when people think they're still in control. At 6 p.m., I called my daughter. "Come by tomorrow morning," I said. "We need to talk." Her voice shook. "About what?" "About the things you didn't think I'd notice." I hung up before she could respond. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the camera feeds glow in the dark, waiting for a knock that might end everything. The next morning, my daughter would walk through my door, believing she still had the advantage. At 8:42 a.m., I saw her car on the porch camera. A gray sedan I didn't recognize at first. Newer than anything she'd owned before. Cleaner. More expensive. Another detail that didn't fit. She sat in the driver's seat for a full 30 seconds before getting out, breathing, preparing. I recognized the posture. It was the same one she used as a child, before admitting she'd broken something. When the knock came, it was soft, careful. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. She walked in slowly, eyes scanning the room. Not for comfort, for control. "Mom," she said, forcing a smile. "You okay?" I didn't answer. I sat in the chair opposite the couch. The same chair I'd measured twice when I installed the camera behind the framed photo on the wall. She sat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What's going on?" she asked. "I found something under my truck," I said calmly, her face drained of color. I let the silence do the work. "A device," I continued. "Professionally installed, warm, active." She swallowed hard. "I don't know what you're talking about." I leaned forward and placed printed photos on the table. The tracker, the serial number, the mounting point. Her hands trembled. "You've been in my garage," I said, alone longer than necessary. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "There's more," I said. "Software on my computer, remote access, installed 6 months ago." Her eyes darted toward the desk. "And a power of attorney filed in my name," I added. "Rejected, barely." Her composure cracked. "They were going to take everything," she whispered. "Who?" I asked. She pressed her hands to her face. "Iron Peak. I borrowed money. I lost it. I thought I could fix it before you ever knew." "How much?" 400,000. The number landed heavy. I waited. "They said if I didn't secure the property, they'd come themselves," she said. "They scared me." "You scared me first," I replied. She started crying then. Deep, broken sobs. "I never meant to hurt you," she said. "I just needed time. You installed a kill device on my truck." Her head snapped up. "What?" "No, it was just tracking. That's what they told me. Your signature was on the purchase." She froze. The door behind her opened. 2 agents stepped inside, badges visible. "Ma'am," one said, "you're under arrest." She turned to me, eyes wide with betrayal. "You set me up. I saved myself," I said. They led her away without resistance. I sat alone after they left. The house quiet again. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. But the danger wasn't over yet. Because the people she owed wouldn't stop just because she was gone. The agents left just before noon. They didn't take much with them. A few documents, the printed photos, the audio recorder I'd set on the table. Enough to begin, they said. Enough to justify holding her. Not enough to make me safe. I knew that the moment the second patrol car disappeared down the road. People like Iron Peak Holdings don't care about arrests. They care about leverage. And my daughter had just been removed as their point of control, which meant they would look elsewhere. I locked every door, closed every blind. The ranch felt different now, smaller, exposed. At 2:17 p.m., a black SUV rolled slowly past the property. Didn't stop, didn't turn around, just passed. At 3:40, it came back. This time, it pulled into the gravel turnout across the road and sat there, engine idling. I watched from the porch camera feed. 2 silhouettes inside. One leaned forward, pointing toward the house. They were evaluating, just like Claire said they would. I called the number the federal agent had given me, straight to voicemail. I left a message with my location and the vehicle description. Then I waited. At dusk, the SUV was gone. That didn't calm me. It made it worse. That night, I slept in the living room with the lights off and the laptop glowing beside me. Every sound carried weight. Every branch tapping the window felt deliberate. At 6:12 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without speaking. "Mrs. Hale," a man said. Calm, polite, professional. "We need to discuss an outstanding obligation." "I don't owe you anything," I replied. A pause. Then a soft chuckle. "Your daughter disagrees. She's in custody." "Yes," he said, "which complicates things. I've contacted federal authorities." "So have we," he said smoothly, "in our own way." I didn't respond. We prefer cooperation, he continued. But time is expensive. If you're willing to sign, this all ends cleanly. And if I don't? Another pause, longer this time. Then we'll recover our investment through other means. The line went dead. At 7:30 a.m., two unmarked vehicles parked at the far edge of the property. Not close enough to trespass. Close enough to be seen. I called the agent again. This time, she answered. They're here, I said. Not subtle anymore. Stay inside, she replied. We're moving. By mid-morning, 3 federal vehicles arrived. The unmarked cars vanished before they reached the gate. Too late. The message had already been delivered. That afternoon, I transferred the ranch into an irrevocable trust, emergency filing, temporary protection, enough to complicate any seizure. The agent told me I'd done the right thing. It didn't feel right. It felt like running from a fire you didn't start and couldn't put out. That night, I sat alone on the porch, staring at land I might lose anyway. And for the first time since this began, I allowed myself to cry, not for my daughter, for the fact that love had been used as a weapon. 6 months later, the trial would end, but the consequences would linger far longer than any sentence. 6 months is a strange amount of time, long enough for anger to cool, too short for wounds to close. Winter came early that year. Snow settled over the ranch like a quiet apology, smoothing the scars left behind by fear. I spent most mornings with a shovel in my hands and my thoughts nowhere useful. The trial moved slower than I expected. Fraud, identity theft, elder exploitation, conspiracy. The words sounded clinical in court. They didn't capture the nights I slept in a chair with the lights on, or the way I still checked under the truck out of habit, even though the device had been removed and destroyed. My daughter stood thinner when she appeared in court, paler, smaller. She didn't look at me at first. When she finally did, her eyes weren't angry, they were empty. The judge sentenced her to 7 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release. She nodded as if she'd expected it, as if she'd already accepted that this was the only possible ending. Her associates didn't fare better. Iron Peak collapsed under investigation, raids, arrests, frozen accounts. My daughter's testimony helped. She gave them everything. I didn't attend every hearing. I didn't need to. The ranch was placed into permanent protection, untouchable. The relief felt muted, like locking the door after the storm had already passed through the house. In early spring, I adopted a dog, a border collie mix with too much energy and no sense of personal space. I named her Luna. She followed me everywhere, watched everything, and slept at the foot of my bed like it was her job. The nightmares faded after that, not completely, but enough. Letters came from prison. At first, I didn't open them. They stacked neatly in a drawer. Then one day, I did. I don't expect forgiveness, she wrote. I needed someone to stop me. I read it twice, then folded it and put it back. People asked if I regretted calling the authorities. I told them no. Regret belongs to people who had another choice. I joined a local group that worked with seniors, spoke at community centers, told my story without names, without bitterness. After one talk, a woman approached me quietly. I found something under my car, she said, and my son's been asking strange questions. I gave her my lawyer's number. That was when I realized this wasn't rare. It was just quiet. That night, sitting on the porch with Luna curled at my feet, I understood something I'd resisted for months. Love doesn't excuse harm, and survival isn't betrayal. The final lesson didn't come from court or prison. It came from a call that proved this story was far from over. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Unknown number, local area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. Habit, mostly, but something in me hesitated. The same instinct that had told me months ago that quiet things don't stay quiet. I answered. Mrs. Hale? A man asked. His voice was unsteady, careful, like someone stepping onto thin ice. Yes, my name is Thomas Reed. I was given your number by a legal aid office. They said you might understand. I waited. I found something under my car, he said. A black device, magnetic, blinking. The air left my lungs slowly. How old are you, Thomas? I asked. 68. And who's been asking you questions lately? There was a pause. Then, my niece. I closed my eyes. He told me the story in pieces. How she'd moved in to help after his surgery. how she'd offered to manage his bills, how she'd asked about his routines, his driving habits, his insurance. He thought he was being paranoid. I told him to stop talking and start documenting. Photos, dates, serial numbers, bank records, computer logs. Do not confront her, I said. Not yet. Why are you helping me, he asked. Because no one helped me until I was almost dead, I replied. We spoke for nearly an hour. When we finished, I gave him my attorney's number and the federal agent's office. And one final piece of advice. Trust the feeling that made you pull me. After we hung up, I sat on the porch for a long time. Luna rested her head on my knee. The sky was wide and blue, indifferent to everything that had happened beneath it. I used to think my story was an exception, a rare betrayal, a tragedy people whispered about and then forgot. I was wrong. This was a pattern. Quiet, patient, rationalized as care. I opened my notebook and wrote Thomas's name beneath the others. 3 so far. 3 people who had noticed before it was too late. That night, I opened my daughter's latest letter. I'm learning why I did what I did, she wrote. It doesn't excuse it, but I see it now. I folded the letter carefully. Understanding doesn't undo damage, but it might prevent repetition. I looked out over the land I'd almost lost, the house I'd nearly died in, the life that had been reduced to collateral and then returned. I wasn't angry anymore. I was alert. And that, I realized, might be the most important survival skill of all. What I chose to do next would turn a private betrayal into a public warning and change more lives than I ever expected. I never planned to speak publicly. For most of my life, privacy had been a form of dignity. You handled problems quietly. You didn't air family failures for strangers to dissect. That belief ran deep, stitched into me by habit and pride. But silence is what nearly got me killed. The invitation came from a senior advocacy group in Northridge City. They were hosting a small workshop on financial safety. Someone had mentioned my case, asked if I'd be willing to share lessons learned. I almost declined. Then Thomas Reed called again. His niece had been arrested 2 days earlier. Forged documents, surveillance devices, an attempted loan using his property as collateral. Same pattern, different faces. That decided it. The room held maybe 40 people, folding chairs, coffee that tasted burnt, a projector that hummed louder than it should have, ordinary, unthreatening, which made the danger harder to explain. I didn't tell my story dramatically. I told it precisely. Dates, behaviors, escalation, how help slowly becomes control, how concern turns into monitoring. I watched heads nod as I spoke. Recognition is louder than applause. Afterward, people came up quietly, one by one. My grandson set up my computer last year. My sister keeps asking about my will. My daughter insists I don't drive anymore. I didn't tell them what to think. I told them what to check. Document everything. Protect access to your finances. Trust discomfort before disaster. A month later, I was invited to speak again. Then again. Libraries, churches, community centers. No cameras, no headlines. Just rooms full of people who had been taught their instincts were weakness. They weren't. One evening, a woman approached me after a talk. Her hands shook. I thought I was crazy, she said. Thank you for saying it out loud. That night, I understood something fundamental. This wasn't about my daughter anymore. It was about interruption, stopping the pattern before it completed. At home, life found a new rhythm. Luna grew bigger, smarter, protective. She barked at unfamiliar cars and slept with one ear open. I still received letters from prison. Less often now. They were quieter, more reflective. I don't blame you, my daughter wrote once. I blame who I became. I didn't respond, not because I hated her, because some boundaries are permanent. The ranch stayed peaceful, safe, mine. But I knew peace required vigilance, not paranoia, awareness. I had learned that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives with groceries, smiles, and good intentions. The final truth took years to accept, but once I did, everything finally made. People still ask me if I regret it. They lower their voices when they do, as if regret is something sacred, something I'm supposed to carry, because the person who betrayed me shared my blood. I tell them the truth. No, regret belongs to choices that had better alternatives. What I faced did not. The path in front of me was narrow and unforgiving. On one side was silence, compliance, and eventually disappearance. On the other was action, evidence, and survival. I chose survival. That choice cost me a daughter, at least the version of her I thought I knew. But it saved my life. And once I understood that, the guilt stopped having power over me. Blood ties are powerful. They teach us loyalty before logic, sacrifice before safety. But no bond gives someone the right to erase you. Not slowly, not legally, not for your own good. I still live on the ranch outside Red Willow Valley. The land hasn't changed. The fences still need mending. The porch still creaks in the morning. Luna still patrols like she's guarding a kingdom. I check under my truck sometimes, not because I expect to find anything, but because awareness is now part of who I am. I keep speaking. Quiet rooms, small audiences, real conversations. I don't use fear. I use patterns. Because patterns save lives. Elder abuse doesn't always look violent. Sometimes it looks helpful, organized, logical. It wears the face of family and speaks in the language of care. If you're listening to this and something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Discomfort is not confusion. It's information. Document everything. Protect your access. Delay confrontation. Seek outside eyes. Survival is not selfish. I learned that too late to avoid the damage, but early enough to prevent the end. My daughter writes occasionally. Therapy, accountability, reflection. I believe people can change. I also believe some bridges cannot be crossed again. Maybe one day there will be forgiveness. Maybe there won't. Either way, I will remain alive, free, and in control of my own life. That is not cruelty. That is wisdom earned at a cost. If this story reached you because you needed it, pass it on. Say the quiet part out loud for someone else. The warning matters more than the comfort of silence. Blood may be thick, but self-preservation is thicker, and choosing to live is never the wrong choice.